Alright, hello and welcome to Mystery Monday number 26, where our learning goal is to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support an analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as making inferences that you can draw from the text, including where the text leaves matters uncertain. At the end of today's story, you will be asked to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 4. That scale is listed here. If you're at a 4, that means that you're drawing inferences from the text and you're pointing to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point. You're also able to identify where the text leaves matters uncertain. You're also picking up on nuance, like sarcasm and irony in the text. If you're at a 3, and this is where we'd like everybody to be, if you're at a 3, you're sort of meeting the standard, so to speak. A 4 is sort of above and beyond. We want you to be at a 3. And if you're at a 3, that means you can draw inferences from the text, point to evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and you're able to identify where the text leaves matters uncertain. A 2 means that you can draw inferences from the text and evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, but you're not really identifying where the text leaves matters uncertain. You can also think of it as like, if you're at a 2, that means that if my teacher's there kind of talking me through it, I understand it. A 3 is like, if I just read it, I understand it, I get it. And a 4 is above and beyond. A 4 means that I could be the one teaching this material. A 1 means that you're unsure of how to draw inferences from the text, which is okay. I need to know that too, because that means that I can do things differently in my instruction to help you understand. Today's story is titled A Matter of Balance. Not until the following morning, a Monday, did Tom Jones conclude, yet again, that life is a series of balancings. Maybe not quite Newtonian, he felt, in that every reaction is equal and opposite to the initiating action, more in the sense that the events of life roll back and forth over a fulcrum of fate, so that things even out inexorably over time. This notion had been exemplified twice the evening before. The first time in the elevator of the Federal Building on Danforth Avenue, Tom had been first to board the elevator, and, as was his wont, he'd stepped politely to the back. Although only two more people got on, Tom got the unmistakable impression that one of them, the Marine lieutenant, had deliberately and rudely jammed him against the back wall, keeping him there until the operator let the officer off at the 14th floor. Lording it, Tom understood. Big people often did that, especially the younger ones. But what the Marine obviously didn't know was that he confidently believed to be his commanding, uniformed presence was undermined by his dandruff. A bad case, too, trailing so far down his back that Tom held his breath each time the sway of the elevator rocked him closer to the man's protruding shoulder blade. Balance, Tom realized. Nature equaling things out. It was almost pleasant, if just a touch malicious, to contemplate the officer's embarrassment when he discovered that his image of himself had been betrayed. A second reinforcement of Tom's reflections on balance he owed to a radio program that night. Well, perhaps not entirely. His own listening skills deserved some of the credit, too. When the FBI had telephoned him just after dinner, Tom had been preparing for a quiet evening, looking forward to an unhurried scan of the as yet unread sections of the Sunday paper. He interrupted by a few chuckles from the Chase and Sanborn Hour on NBC at 8 o'clock. Tom Jones, like most of the country, was a devoted follower of Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, and rarely failed to have his radio on a Sunday night. But then, the call had come. Just a few minutes of your time. Tonight, Dr. Jones, Agent Barnowski had purred into the telephone. A matter of national security. The borough is appealing to your sense of duty. That's why the timing is, well, rather unusual, I admit. However, I'm sure you'll understand the importance when I explain. It had taken almost an hour to get to the Federal Building, and when he entered through the revolving doors, Tom realized, for perhaps the very first time, that not everyone listened to Edgar Bergen on Sunday nights. The doorman, obviously not functioning in the role his uniform dictated, was standing under the wall directory, totally absorbed by his radio, tuned rather loudly to a CBS station, which was pouring forth a paroxysm of anxiety about some alien-looking cylinder that had landed in New Jersey and had just incinerated some state troopers who tried to approach it. Tom waited for the elevator just long enough to hear a station break remind listeners that they were listening to a drama. The doorman didn't hear that, however. He'd been racing for the bank of telephones at the other end of the lobby. Many others didn't hear it either, apparently. The next day, the morning news described a major panic in the streets that night as a result of the radio show. Once again, Tom realized balance had asserted itself. He had been dragged out of his home on a Sunday evening and into what could have been very serious danger. On Danforth Avenue, there had been several dozen injuries, yet he'd missed the entire imbroglio, sitting in the FBI's 15th floor office. The meeting itself lasted far longer than Agent Bronowski had promised. Almost the first hour alone taken up with the agent's psychophancy. We realized, Dr. Jones, what an imposition this is on your time. After all, Sunday evenings are precious to us all. He he he. But I'm sure you understand why we would have to be circumspect. He he he. For someone of your stature, Dr. Jones, it must be an unaccustomed phenomenon for you to be asked to attend elsewhere. Surely you are more accustomed to be the summoner than the summonee. But then you see, Tom had tuned out quickly, but he was kept from nodding off, another habit of his, by the discomfort of the government-issue chairs on which he and the G-Man faced each other across the table, and by his fascination with the birthmark on Agent Bronowski's scalp, clearly visible through the man's thinning hair. It looked so strikingly like the outline of a tiny barbershop quartet that it was all Tom could do to resist tracing over it with his fountain pen. Agent Bronowski did eventually get to the point in the second hour, although he was just a circumlocutory as he been while gushing over Tom in the first. I'm confident you spontaneously analyzed the nature of the investigations that originated in this office. Tom had indeed made a note of the sign on the door. Federal Bureau of Investigation, National Security. It's your work, Dr. Jones. This is terribly awkward. I believe the word is polyesters. Our interest is in that. Well, it's not quite that simple. Tom had remained entirely expressionless, letting Bronowski lead. As you know, with war almost certain in Europe, and, well, with your company's rather close relationship with the industrialists of the Third Reich, well, in a nutshell, what we need from you, what your country needs from you is, well, what you are doing with this new polyester formula. The interview ended not long after that, with Tom agreeing to meet Agent Bronowski again in 2 days after thinking over what he'd been asked. When he prepared for bed that night, setting out of his blue uniform, as he always did, the one with the janitorial services tag over the pocket, the issue of balance did not occur to him immediately. He was more preoccupied with how the FBI could have confused him with the other Tom Jones, one of the company's research chemists. It was only when he realized that the whole thing was a setup, that particular insight came the next morning, that the idea of balance came to him as well. What he would do, he decided, was to speak to the real FBI. The agency would be quite interested, he was sure, in doing a little balancing of its own. So your question is this: why does Tom Jones know that his interview was a setup? Alright, so back at the worksheet here, the first question says, we're supposed to infer Tom Jones's height in relation to Agent Bronowski. There are two inferences that reference his height. I don't want to say inferences, I'll say instances that reference his height. The first is in the second paragraph of the story regarding the Marine lieutenant, and the second is in direct relation to Agent Bronowski. Note, if you can answer this question, you're able to identify where the text leaves matters uncertain. So being able to do this puts you at least at a 3 if you can figure this part out. Question number 2 says, how does all of the and well between the agent's thoughts, well really it's more his questions in the interview, help us answer the last question, this one here. What does it say about Agent Bronowski? Here's what I mean by those ahs and wells. It says, as you know, with war almost certain in Europe, and, well, with your company's rather close relationship with the industrialists of the Third Reich, well, in a nutshell, what we need from you, what your country needs from you is, well, what you are doing with this new polyester formula. You can tell that he's sort of catching himself a lot with, this here, well, in a nutshell, well, he's not finishing sentences. What does that suggest about him, and how does it help us answer the final question? And the final question says, why does Tom Jones know that the interview was a setup? And then the last question here is, where would you rank your ability to make inferences according to the scale that's typically on the front page of the document, but also posted here? Where would you rate your ability to make those inferences based on this scale? 4, 3, 2, 1. So here are your answers to questions 1 and 2. The first, like I said, there's one reference to his height in reference to the Marine lieutenant. And that quote is from that second paragraph that says, "This way of the elevator rocked him closer to the man's protruding shoulder blade." So he only reaches the guy's shoulder blade. He's not super tall. And then later on, page 98, it says, "By his fascination with the birthmark on Agent Bronowski's scalp." So he wasn't super tall in relation to the Marine lieutenant, but he was taller than Agent Bronowski, if that makes sense. You could see his scalp. You could see the top. So we can infer then that not only is he taller than Bronowski, but Bronowski is short because he's not super tall. And number 2, how does all of the and well in between the agent's questions help us answer the question? We kind of went through that. What does it say about him? It suggests that he is not confident, and he knows himself that the interview is a setup. Sorry, I have a mistype on there, but he knows himself that the interview is a setup. Otherwise, he would speak with more confidence. And before we have to answer the last question, there are a couple pieces of context that you should know, because 1938 is a long time ago, and that's when this took place. How do I know that it was 1938? Because it doesn't say that it was 1938, but here's how I know. The reference I'm using is this. The next day, the morning news described a major panic in the streets that night as a result of the radio show. So a radio show caused a major panic in the streets? How did that happen? Well, Orson Welles was a radio host. 1938 radio play about Martians invading New Jersey. And according to Radiolab, this is an article from 2010, put on by Radiolab, about 12 million people were listening when Wells's broadcast came on the air, and about 1 in every 12 thought it was true, and some percentage of that 1 million ran out of their homes. So that's the panic in the streets, this idea that Martians were invading New Jersey, and it incited panic in the people of New Jersey. So 1938 is the year. You should also know that during this time, there were height restrictions on agents and who could be FBI agents based on things like that, physical stature and gender roles as well. So use that information to answer the following question. Why does Tom Jones know the interview was a setup? And here is your solution. Tom Jones knows his interview was a setup because the man presenting himself as Agent Bronowski would not have made the height prerequisites to be an agent of the FBI. Although few police forces would dare to enforce height or gender or ethnic restrictions today, it was fairly common at the time Tom Jones had his meeting. We know Tom is not tall because in the elevator he was careful not to let his face get too close to the Marine lieutenant's dandruff-covered shoulder blade. Yet Tom, sitting on the same type of chair as Bronowski, is able to study a birthmark on the alleged agent's scalp, suggesting that Bronowski is even shorter than he. That the story takes place at a time when height restrictions were enforced is confirmed by the fact that it was just prior to World War II. To be precise, it is the date of October 30th, 1938, the Sunday night before the Halloween, when Orson Welles' Mercury Theater presented its adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. Polyesters were reduced to the world in 1940. So that's another piece too, the polyester piece, that they didn't exist at the time. And with that, You have earned 1 unit. Thank you for completing Mystery Monday number 26.